Hey, it's New Thought Talk. I'm your host, the Reverend Steve Walling, from the Spiritual Awareness Center located in Fresno, California. It's the heart of the Central Valley, and the Central Valley is the heart of California. So we got a lot of heart going on here today, and it's a great day. I'm glad you're here. I'm glad that I'm here. I claimed my day before I opened my eyes this morning, and I hope you have also. You know, we talk each week about New Thought, science of mind and spirit topics. And these are a part of a philosophy that Ernest Holmes and various other New Thought teachers taught. And the philosophy is not a hard dogma per se, but it is a philosophy that if you take the time to learn, to understand it, to embody it as a way of living, if you will, that it will carry you on a spiritual path of enlightenment and understanding. And what we teach is it carries you to a point of being in harmony with divine principle, that which we call God. And it's an amazing thing. And along that line, what I wanted to talk about today was something Ernest Holmes called spiritual self-reliance. And I don't think I've ever heard spiritual self-reliance as a concept in any other spiritual philosophy per se, but in some way, I suppose that all spiritual teachings teach a reliance on the divine in some way. When we talk about it being a self-reliance, what we're talking about is a recognition of where we make our connectedness with God, with Source, with First Cause, and how that plays out in our life, how we have an active role in it, and ultimately how that no matter what life brings at us, we have a bigger God. That doesn't mean that everything's going to be necessarily rosy, but it means that as life brings what life brings at us, that understanding and having faith and belief in a bigger God, we know that the eventual outcome is going to be of a harmonious demonstration, some way, somehow. So going back, there's a book that I pulled off my library shelf. It's called Help for Today, and it was written by Ernest Holmes and William Hornaday. He was a minister of religious science. I don't know if the book is still in print today. I did a quick search for it, and I didn't find it, but I think you can find it out there, used through Amazon or some of those things, if you're so inclined. But he has a chapter in here, and this is what got my attention. The chapter was entitled Spiritual Self-Reliance. And I can't say that I was not familiar with the idea, the concept per se, but I never really thought about putting it specifically in those terms. So when I came across it in my reading, I took time and I began to see what it was that Dr. Holmes was teaching with this particular idea and concept. And I'm going to read you a couple things from The Science of Mind, what we call the textbook, and then we're going to pick it up from there, and we're going to kind of drill down. We're going to peel off the layers of this idea, this concept of being spiritually self-reliant and what that means for each and every one of us as we go through it. I think it's an awesome concept. So anyway, what I want to read to you first comes from page 218. And Dr. Holmes says, it's easy to believe that God is perfect. It's one of the things we teach, one of the things we believe is that the creative source of all that is divine perfection. He says, but we must also believe that spiritual man is perfect. And we come to this understanding, and if you're new to this, think about this, kind of contemplate the idea of an infinite creative source, consciousness, God, whatever we want to call it, that if it was anything other than perfection, and I'm not saying that I have a complete definition within my own consciousness of what that perfection is, but if it was anything less than perfection, it couldn't be infinite, because if you're familiar with what happens when you have an unlimited amount of time, if you have some sort of imperfection in there, ultimately it becomes self-destructive. And we don't look at creation as being a self-destructive force. We see it as being constructive and infinite and ever ongoing. So, our first supposition is that God is infinite. The second is that God is, in this infiniteness, perfect. Therefore, perfection, when it creates, cannot create something less than perfection. But we look out into the world, don't we? We see chaos and all sorts of stuff. But we've skipped a step, and this is what Dr. Holmes was talking about. We've skipped a step because we are spiritual beings created by the divine principle, and we have a physical expression that we call life, but is secondary to the truth of who we are as a spiritual being. So he goes on and he says, we must also believe that spiritual man is perfect, and since it is difficult to believe that objective man is perfect, and, like I say, all we have to do is look at the world around us, and we see more than a few things that are, that would question perfection, right? He says, we must confine our statements to a realization of the spiritual perfection of man. And in such a degree as our realization becomes a subjective embodiment, the objective healing, demonstration, manifestation will take place. We are conscious beings in and within and a demonstration of an infinite consciousness. And so We were gifted with something, though, that is called volition. Because if we weren't gifted with this, we wouldn't have been independent. And it's important that as creative beings, if you will, spiritual creative, or being spiritually created from the divine, that we have the ability to exercise choice. And our journey, our ultimate spiritual journey, is the exercise of that choice, bringing ourselves into a greater harmony and alignment with the divine principle. It's done unto us as we believe. By our faith, we will know the truth. And so as we move forward in this, we grow, okay? Life is meant to be a struggle of sorts, because life grows through struggle. When I say life grows, I'm not just talking about the life force within us, but I'm talking about, people grow. When we just take learning, for example, when we begin to learn something new, it is a struggle of sorts. When we begin to involve ourselves in some kind of a physical activity to improve our physical body, so to speak, there's struggle that has to take place in order for that improvement to be demonstrated. And it's that way in all aspects of life. We see the caterpillar that turns into a cocoon, but the struggle to create the beauty of the butterfly is that point when the caterpillar, the butterfly, breaks forth from the cocoon. And people have found through experience that if you, by thinking you're doing a good deed and helping that butterfly to emerge from the cocoon, ultimately it will die, because the struggle is necessary for it to gain the strength that it needs in order to survive. And it's that way with our physical life. Struggle is a very important part. We don't always think about it as a struggle, and we talk about it as learning, we talk about it as practice, we talk about it as many different things. But still, it is us constantly doing things that has to push beyond our limitations to achieve something greater. And that's what I mean when I talk about this idea of struggling. So Holmes tells us this, that, we have this spiritual perfection, but we have our objective or physical demonstration. And it's just pretty hard to get it in our mind that objectively we're perfection. But we can embody the idea of a spiritual perfection of all beings. And we've talked about the concept that, if we're all spiritual beings, if we're all God demonstrating as individual beings, but God is a one, then there ultimately is nothing but a oneness, a unity of all. And that's a talk that we've had in the past, and we'll come back to it from many times, because it's so very important to understand our connectedness with all of creation. But in the meantime, as we're walking our spiritual journey, as we're moving forward, as we're seeking to become spiritually self-reliant, if you will, the understanding that in our spiritualness, our spiritual beingness, that we are truly perfect, and that we can achieve greater perfection in our physical life experience when we begin to embody that belief. And we'll move forward with that. And I want to take us now to another thought here. Let's see, wrong page. I'm going to go here. And I have the wrong page mark. But what I'm going to talk about is that when we grasp the idea of a spiritual universe, okay, we're seeking to become spiritually self-reliant. The next thing that is important for us to do is to have an understanding of what the divine is in our life, what God is in our day-to-day life experience, and what's our relationship to that. And oftentimes we call that belief. We call it belief or faith. And I'm going to break right here. I'm going to find the page I was looking for, and I'll see you when we come back. We'll pick it up from there.
At Laulea Travels, we strive to make your vacation experience as relaxing as possible. From the time you start dreaming about it to the time you're sharing your vacation photos with your friends and coworkers. Our vow is to treat your vacation as if it were our own. If personal service, attention to detail, and years of travel experience are important to you, then let Laulea Travels plan your next dream vacation. Visit lauleatravels.com or call 559-360-1933.
Certifying foster homes for placement of children suffering from abuse, neglect, and abandonment. To help, contact Lisa Caceres with Angels of Grace at 559-268-0000.
Support Angels of Grace. Attend the Luau of Love Saturday, September 22nd at Arte Americas. For more information and tickets, go to angelsofgrace.com.
Looking for work? Tired of minimum wage? For as low as $200, become certified as a forklift driver at the Certified Forklift Training Center. Call 559-325-8097 or visit cftc.net.
Do you or a loved one have memory problems or mild Alzheimer's disease? Then you may be interested in the Daybreak ALZ Clinical Research Study. The Daybreak ALZ study is a clinical research study for people with memory problems or mild Alzheimer's disease. The study will examine an oral investigational drug that may have some effect on the brain changes associated with Alzheimer's disease. The study is designed to find out whether this investigational drug or study drug can slow down the decline in memory and mental functioning. If you're interested in participating in the study, contact Neuropain Medical Center at research@neuropain.com or call 559-437-9700. Extension 310.
CentralValleyTalk.com.
Welcome back to New Thought Talk. I'm your host, the Reverend Steve Walling, located in Fresno, California, at the Spiritual Awareness Center. Anyway, during our break, I found the page I was looking for, and what I'm doing here in the early part of this is kind of laying a foundation for this understanding of when we talk about spiritual self-reliance. So the next thing I want to go to, and this is found on page 459 in the Science of Mind, and it's entitled "The Two Great Commandments." It's taken from Matthew 22:36 through 41, and Holmes says the two great commandments are to love God and our brother man. To love God and to love our brother man. He says, on these hang all the laws and the prophet. Love is a complete unity with life, and we cannot enter in this state unless we are in unity with all that lives, with all. And this is no exception, and we've talked about this before, these two great commandments. To love God alone is not enough, for this would exclude our fellow man. To love our fellow man alone is not sufficient, for this would be too limited of a concept of God. So, we've talked about this idea of our spiritual perfection, and we've talked about this idea of loving God with all that we are. And ultimately, when we talk about the idea of spiritual self-reliance, and I think this was probably taken from a presentation that Dr. Holmes did for maybe one of his radio or TV shows. But he outlined what he considered steps in acquiring spiritual self-reliance. He says, 1, to believe in God with the intensity of our whole being. And that goes to what we were just talking about. You know, the idea of loving God with all that we are. Is it, in fact, a recognition of the truth of who we are? We are God expressing through us as us. We love ourselves, we love God, we love our neighbors. There's one unity. There's a one. And, you know, it's amazing when we begin to look at this idea, this concept of unity and oneness. And you can look out in the world and you see all sorts of chaos. You see, you know, people wanting to separate themselves out for one reason or another. And as we see this separation take place, we see continual, there's a jockeying, there's judgment, there's positioning, there's all sorts of stuff that goes on that reaffirms that separation. And from that, we see division in the world. We see chaos. Someone is trying to achieve something over someone else or a country or a group of people or individuals. And, you know, if there's just God, if there's just one, when we look out in the world, we cannot resolve that idea of all this chaos with an idea of an infinite oneness, unless we realize, this goes back to what I said in the first segment, that God has given each and every one of us the ability to make choices. And our spiritual journey is really a journey of self-discovery of the truth of who we are. And New Thought, from its very inception, was considered a teaching of truth. And we believe that there's one ultimate truth. I'm not saying that we have the definitive handle on it, if you will. And I do believe that all spiritual teachings contain some aspect of the truth. What makes New Thought, Science of Mind, Religious Science stand out is that it's not a singular spiritual philosophy, but that it is a collection of truth teachings from all the various philosophies, and that it is compiled into a philosophy which Ernest Holmes called a way of life, something to have faith in. And when we understand that we see this oneness of God, that there cannot be, in the oneness of God, there cannot be any separation, then we can look out the world through eyes of harmony, through eyes of peace, through eyes of love. And although the rest of the world may be in a state of chaos, our heart, our energy, our experience can go out and create around us a greater good, and through us out into the world a greater world. So, understanding that a belief in God with the intensity of all that we are is very important. Understanding next that we believe in the reality of the spiritual self as forever one with God, and we've kind of covered that. Imagine, spiritual self is an infiniteness that is God expressing as us, individualized, and we're experiencing it. And our journey in this physical life is to the unfolding, the enlightenment, to come to the point of that truth, of that realization. So if I know that God is all there is, and if I know that my spiritual self is God expressing as me, that they are in truth one, that my spiritual journey is that connectedness. This brings us to the third principle that Dr. Holmes had in this idea of developing spiritual self-reliance, and that is establishing continual communion with Spirit, with God, which is forever within and around us. And there's a quote here, it's from Isaiah, and it goes, before they call, I will answer, and while they are yet speaking, I will hear them. This is it. Establishing a belief in an infinite source, a unity, a oneness, peace, harmony, infinite love. Establishing a belief in our spiritual beingness, that, and how could it be any other way? And establishing communion with this. And how do we establish communion? We can establish communion through prayer. We can establish it through meditation. We can establish it through various ways that many spiritual philosophies teach, things that are individual to us, because that's where we make our connectedness with God, with Source. No one can define God for us. No one can experience God for us. We have to do that ourselves. And we have to do it in such a way that we are aware that we have had the experience of that connectedness. You see, being a spiritual being created by the divine principle, there is that which exists within each and every one of us. You can call it an urge, a light, a center. There's many different things and ways that people recognize it, the Christ within, God within. But that within us, which seeks to basically to become an awareness of our consciousness, that as we grow in awareness of that innerness within ourselves, and as we seek to enlighten ourselves, to make that connection, to bring forth the truth within us, we begin to demonstrate in this life a greater good, as I said, and a greater life experience. And knowing that we have a bigger God than anything that can happen to us. This is what forms the basis of our spiritual self-reliance. We can go through the day. We can declare at the beginning of the day that today is the gift of God to each and every one of us, that we can own the day, that yes, we will have obstacles during the day. Yes, we will struggle during the day, but no matter what the obstacles, no matter what the struggles, we have a bigger God, and we can claim that right at the beginning of the day. And when we get to the end of the day, we can look back and reflect upon the day that's passed and know that we have things to move into tomorrow that maybe we were addressing today, but no matter what, we can be grateful for the good that we experienced. We can be grateful that we're moving forward. We can be grateful for the life that we're living. And so we begin our day in recognition of the truth. We end our day in the gratitude for the divine principle expressing has us, and we live our day in between knowing that we have a bigger and greater God than anything that can come our way. When we do this, think about it. When we do this, we have spiritual confidence. We have spiritual faith. We have spiritual self-reliance. And self-reliance, sometimes people confuse this idea of self-reliance as putting ourselves ahead of God, and that's not what we're doing. Our self-reliance is realizing that our connectedness with God exists within ourselves. Now, in doing this, we have to be aware that sometimes our ego wants to step up, right? It wants to be in charge, if you will. It wants to be the individual aspect of us that takes credit for. But you know, simplistically put, that's a fool's journey, because no matter what, God has more answers. God has more power. God has more good than anything that our ego can take claim to. When we depend on our ego, all of a sudden our choices become very limited. When we depend on the divine principle, when we depend on God, and we realize that God does answer prayer, we can move forward. We can move forward in confidence. And that's the kind of confidence that Dr. Holmes was talking about when he talks about this concept of spiritual self-reliance. I want to read this quote to you, and this is from Ernest Holmes. And it says, "Out of the mind of God, you were created. As a divine being, and as a divine being, you must recognize and know the source of that which created you of itself. And that source is the creative spirit of God Almighty. There is no other creative source or force. There is no other. How can there be in an infiniteness? When we have an infinite principle that we call God, you cannot have anything at all that can exist in opposition to it. When we come to that realization, we can begin to look at the world through different eyes. When we come to the realization, as Jesus said, that it's done unto us as we believe, we can look at the world through different eyes. When we come to the realization that we are not alone in our life, but we are partnered with the divine principle, we can look at the world and our life through different eyes. And as we do this, we become more empowered. But understand that our empowerment is an empowerment that is in alignment with principle. In other words, it's in alignment with peace. It's in alignment with harmony. It's in alignment with love, with beauty. And it is in alignment with abundance on so many different levels. And most of the time we don't believe that, or we believe parts of it, or maybe one or two things. As we begin to seek to experience the divine principle in our life, we will begin to see the divine principle demonstrate and manifest in our life. We're going to take our next break, and I'll pick this up when we come back. Contact David Sprinkle at Century 21 Denton Realty to buy this beautiful home in Yosemite Lakes Park. 4 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, and over 2,900 square feet. Dave can help you with your real estate needs in Fresno, Madera, and Mariposa counties and surrounding areas. When you need a realtor, call Dave Sprinkle at 559-285-9785.
Diane Ainsworth's books of poetry and scriptures are available at condiopress.com and as ebooks at amazon.com. Diane hopes the words in her books will convey the unconditional love Jesus has for you. Learn more at godsinspirationsblog.wordpress.com and get a copy of Diane's books today. Protect yourself by letting private investigator Michael Morgan Clark get the facts you need in matters of infidelity and divorce, corporate investigations, criminal defense, workers' comp, child parental abduction, wrongfully accused. Michael Morgan Clark will investigate anyone. Call 559-785-1900 or visit clarkinvestigations.com.
CentralValleyTalk.com.
Welcome back to New Thought Talk. I'm your host, the Reverend Steve Walling. So we talked about this concept, this idea of spiritual self-reliance. And there is a story in the New Testament about the prodigal son that Jesus shares. And Holmes uses this story as a metaphor, if you will, for where we're at, most of us, in our life's journey. That we come to a point in life where we realize that, maybe we're just way too far separated from our spiritual beingness. And this, Holmes says, this is the idea of the prodigal son separated from his father. He's out in the faraway lands, and he says that he's gone through all of his good. And in a sense, we come into this life as kind of a blank slate, but we come in from the divine to experience this physical life. So we've come and we're out in the far off land, so to speak, and we look about, we realize that maybe we're struggling, and maybe we're struggling with limitation, maybe we're struggling with so many things in life. And he says the first thing that happens when we think about returning to our Father is we have doubt. In my Father's house, even my servants eat well, live well. And here I am out in this far land, suffering and eating whatever. And he says, that's common to all of us. When we begin to look at the divine principle, when maybe we first look at our spiritual journey, we might be filled with doubt. And he encourages us to move forward, because just as the prodigal son moved forward, just as he began to consider that, even the worst in my Father's house is better than anything that I've had, and I'll go back and I'll ask forgiveness. Well, we can turn to our Father. We can turn to God. We can turn to the divine principle. And the wonderful thing about this, just like in the story of the prodigal son, where the father runs out and he puts his arm around his son, and he calls for a great coat, and he gives him his ring and all this, and they're going to have the fatted calf killed so that they can celebrate. When we turn to our spiritual Father, there is an open-armedness that awaits us. And we may not be prepared for that. We may not be of a mindset to where we can say, how wonderful this is. I see this as truth. But if we just pause, if we begin to go within ourselves, and this is where we have to go to really meet that which is the divine principle. As we quiet our mind, as we stop looking at the outside world, as we stop defining our life by the chaos that surrounds us, and we go to the source of all that is, and we do that within ourselves, we recognize at some level that which I talked about in the last segment, call it God within, Christ within. There is something within us that as we open ourselves up, as we quiet our minds, as we invite that to speak to us, it responds. People say that when we pray, we're talking to God, and that inspiration is God speaking back to us, and that is so very true. But in order for us to hear what God has to say, oftentimes we have to quiet our mind because it gets so full of stuff. So we take time, we quiet our mind, and we begin to listen. There's a welcoming there, and we can sense it at some level. And the amazing thing about this is that it's more than just a feeling. That when we begin to realize the power, the continuous everywhere presence of the divine principle. And we begin to realize that as spiritual beings, having a physical expression that we call life, that there is a conversation to take place, that we can communicate with our Father, and that we can become, because consciousness is God and we are consciousness expressed as us, we can become a force within our own life in seeing and seeking and experiencing a greater truth. But it's done unto us as we believe. You know, that's kind of the catch, right? When we start, maybe our belief's like this. As we grow, maybe our belief grows. It's like I said in the beginning, life grows through struggle, through seeing and seeking obstacles and overcoming. Our spiritual life grows the same way. As we begin to look at things, and okay, so we can't maybe expand our consciousness to the level of, taking that big bite, but we can a little bite. And we start. When do we start? We start right now. Where do we start? We start wherever we're at. And that's the amazing thing. We don't have to make a journey. We don't have to do anything. We just stop. Stop right now. No matter where you are. You can be out in traffic. You can be at home. Just stop in your mind, in your heart, in the moment. And just say, thank you, God. That's it. Thank you, Spirit. Thank you, God, as to however you relate to it. Thank you. It's amazing. You say, well, what am I thanking for? What you're doing is you're setting up within yourself a consciousness of gratitude. Because truly, your life is a gift. My life is a gift. All life is gifted. It is gifted by the creative source and force of all that is, that which we call God. And in that gift, in the giving of that gift, the amazing thing is that in potential are the things that we need, want, desire to experience and express this life maximally. Which means that when we are stumbling, when we are struggling with life, that there is an answer there for us, that there is a solution there for us. And it's not an answer or solution that our ego is going to get to, but it is an answer or solution that a bigger God than any obstacle that we face will be there for us, will help us transcend. It's amazing. People see and experience healings in their life that they can't understand. There was a time when the medical profession used to look upon healings as basically probably a misdiagnosis. They were misdiagnosed, that really wasn't whatever it was, and so that healing really didn't take place. It's just the patient doing and moving on. We know today that that's not so. We know for a fact, and there is a whole new field of medicine, healing, and if I can get this right, it's called psychoimmuno. I'll look it up and I'll tell you in the next segment because it's amazing. It's this whole thing about how the mind is so important in the healing of the body. There are two people can have everything identical, and one person will respond to treatment and one person won't. And it used to be that, again, medical science would say it's just misdiagnosis. Today we know that the mind plays an incredible role. Well, when we're talking about the mind, what is it we're talking about? We are not talking about our brain. Our brain is a function of our mind. Now, there was a time when neuroscience believed that the mind was a function of the brain. Not so anymore. Through all sorts of really great stuff, through research, science is not real sure. They don't understand, but they've begun to realize that the brain in reality is actually a function of the mind. Now, one of the more common theories behind this is that the mind exists as a field outside of our brain, outside of our body. Well, if the mind is a field outside of our brain and our body, it's some kind of energy because that's what makes up fields. Well, consciousness is some kind of energy. If consciousness, and that's another thing, physicists are beginning to question the whole entire creation, not just the galaxies, not just everything in creation, and they're asking the question, is it possible that creation, all of it, is actually some form of consciousness? Well, there are people that have had an understanding of that going back thousands of years in humanity. They didn't put it in those words, but they understood it in that way. The Buddha kind of understood it in that way. Many other people did. And so when we stop and we begin to look, again, like I said at the beginning of the show, religious science is not a it's not a spiritual teaching that was developed around any one thing. It is an aggregate, if you will, a collection of spiritual teachings from the vast spiritual teachings that have existed throughout mankind, because there's truth to be found in all of them. This idea of consciousness being infinite, and consciousness having to have something to be conscious of, is the creative force behind all that we experience. And if we are spiritual beings having a physical expression that we call life, and if our spiritual beingness is part of our mind, if you will, and it is a field of sorts within a greater field, that when we, and this is something that science understands, that when we do anything in any field, that there is an experience that is expressed through the entire field. Okay, so I get all to that, I say all that to get to a point that if we accept that we have a bigger God than any situation that we can experience in life, whether it be health, whether it be relationship, whether it be personal, whether it be in any other way. If we accept that we have a bigger God, we already have help on the way. And it's amazing. We've seen people in life that have this crazy positiveness in attitude. And no matter what happens, they've always find the good in it. That's what we're talking about. But we're talking about that in a greater sense, in a spiritual sense, and understanding that no matter what happens, that there's a greater good to be found in it. So when we go back to what Dr. Holmes was saying, these three ideas that we love, believe, and know God with an intensity of all that we are, when we know absolutely that we are spiritual beings expressing in this physical life. And when we take time on an ongoing, regular basis to make the communion between our objective self and our subjective self, our spiritual self, that we begin to realize the truth of who we are. And that's where we want to be. When we know the truth of who we are, that's what was meant by when you know the truth will set you free. When you know the truth that you are a spiritual being in a spiritual universe, created by a spiritual beingness. As Jesus told the woman at the well, that God is spirit, and those that worship him, in other words, those that come and commune with him, must do so in spirit. It's not about what we can do through our books. It's not about what we do with our activities. It's about what we do in our inner beingness. And that, it's an amazing thing, but that's something that's available to each and every one of us. No matter where we are in the world, there are some people that are born in the world that have more good available to them. There's people that have less good available to them. There's people that are born with physical deformities. There's people that are born with psychological deformities, if you will. But the thing that's common to all humanity is we all have a withinness that you cannot teach somebody how to get there. You can give them ideas. You can point ways. You can say quiet the mind. You can say meditation. But for each of us, it is our individual journey, but it is a journey that is available to everyone. No one is excluded. No one. The gift of God to all of us is that we can all experience our presence, our experience within God's consciousness, God's creation, God's goodness. And as we do so, it unfolds. So I'm going to take a break. This is our last break, and I'll see you when we come back. I'll have that definition for you.
This 3-bedroom, 2-bath home in Clovis is now for sale. Nestled on a cul-de-sac in a planned unit development, the quiet neighborhood is near Sierra Vista Mall, grocery stores, and Clovis Unified Schools. This well-maintained home, featuring an open kitchen with a breakfast bar, dining area, a family room with fireplace, ceiling fans, vaulted ceilings, and inside laundry room. The large master suite has 2 large closets, a roomy bathroom with shower, and exterior door leading to the patio. Located near the intersection of Gettysburg and Fowler Avenue, call Mike Briggs Properties at 559-486-6758 to buy this home today.
The Saga of Bridget and Amanda by Carol Love Forbes brings to life the struggles of historical women in early America. Find the Saga of Bridget and Amanda on Amazon and Barnes & Noble and order your copy today.
CentralValleyTalk.com.
Welcome back to New Thought Talk. I'm your host, the Reverend Steve Walling, from the Spiritual Awareness Center in Fresno, California. Before we get started, I want to say thank you to Donna and Teresa for your comments, and to those that have liked the show and that are watching. It's awesome to have you here, and if you didn't catch the show live, you may catch us on the New Thought channel. We are there, or you might find us on YouTube or our Facebook page, New Thought Talk. So anyway, once again, thank you for being with us. All right, the word I was looking up, it's a crazy word. When I first came across it, I thought this can't be real. It's very long, but what it is, it's psychoneuroimmunology. Psychoneuroimmunology, and there's even a longer version of it. It's psychoendocrino-neuroimmunology type of thing. In other words, what it is, science is beginning to look at this thing that we call our physical body and realize that there's something going on that science can't define, and it comes from the mind. And the mind is not part of the brain. The mind is some part of a field that surrounds us, so where do they go from there? And, it'll all pan out in some way. But as we believe it is done unto us, has been a solid rock, if you will, as part of most people's faith throughout, history. And if we start there, we don't have to worry about what other people think or what they believe, because our experience with the divine is not out with other people, it's within ourselves. And regardless of what we do during the day, regardless of who we hang with, I mean, let's face it, there's a lot of people out there that hang with people or associate with people that are not necessarily spiritual, or they maybe express a different spiritual belief and understanding. And it's not about going out and beating somebody down with your beliefs. It's not about cowering as someone else is trying to beat you down with your beliefs. It's about you being within yourself confident, spiritually self-reliant. And when we're confident and we're self-reliant, we don't need to go out and express, or if someone else is expressing their beliefs, we don't need to try and belittle them with judgment. We just accept them for the who and what we are, and we allow that acceptance to go through us and out into the world. It's amazing how it will change things, not only in our life, but in the world in general. So, a couple things. This goes back to loving God, loving our neighbor. This goes back to taking time to go within ourselves. And as we go within ourselves, you could say that's like going into our secret place of the Most High, going to the altar that exists within us. I want to share this with you. Dr. Holmes says, again, Jesus tells us that our gifts brought to the altar of life are unacceptable while there is aught between us and our fellow man or woman, our fellow human brothers and sisters, right? Here's a hard saying. He says we cannot always please our fellow men. Human experience has taught that this is impossible. So what attitude then are we to assume? This, he says, whether we please or whether we displease, we need to have no personal animosity towards others. No personal animosity towards others. Accept them as being the divine being that they are. Allow them to have the beliefs that they hold without judgment. Just love them. If you need to, you may want to have to establish boundaries. But those boundaries on all levels should be boundaries that are founded and created out of a loving consciousness. And so we do that, and then I want to share this. He says the secret of prayer. The secret of prayer and its power in the outward life depends upon an unconditional faith in and a reliance upon this inner presence. And this is what we've been talking about. when we go within and we find this inner presence. He says we must enter the closet, go within ourselves. That is, we are to shut out all else and enter into the presence of Spirit in quietness, in confidence, and believing. Prayer has power, not through repetition, but by belief and acceptance. Prayer is to be simple, direct, and receiving. We are to believe that God indwells our own life, that this divine presence is sufficient for all needs, and we are to believe that God will provide for us and bless us abundantly. And when we enter this secret place, we are to leave all else behind, all hate, animosity, and vindictiveness, judgment, or anything else that is not in alignment with truth, love, beauty, harmony, peace. You get the picture, right? He says, for only in doing that can we enter. And to the degree that we can do that individually, to that degree we move into, to that degree we make the connection, to that degree we begin to experience the expression of the divine within us and see the demonstration and manifestation in our life. And that's available to each and every one of us. How awesome is that? You know, maybe you have a particular faith that you grew up in. Nobody says you have to leave that faith. Maybe you have had no faith and you have just questions. Nobody says that you have to accept something that you can't experience. That's not the point, because you can experience at the level that you choose to as you choose to move forward. Consider, if you will, the universe as some form of consciousness, as physics is considering today. Consider that this form of consciousness as an expression within itself is the creative force of all it is. And consider also that we are also some form of consciousness. Well, what this means very simplistically is that all is consciousness. Not only each and every one of us as individuals, but all that we call life and all that we see as what we call non-life. You know, it was the Hindus that believed that God slept in the rocks and dreamt in the flowers and aroused in the animal life and awakened in mankind. And I may not be exact on that, but you get the idea. Faiths have looked at creation with an understanding that it's all. There's no part of creation that's not some part of the divine principle, some part of God. It means the table, chairs, all the stuff we utilize and interact with in our physical day-to-day life. Well, okay, if that's some part of God, and if God is consciousness, and you and I are some part of consciousness, you see there's a connectedness here. And that's why for people that have practiced New Thought philosophy, whether it be religious science or any of the other New Thought philosophies, at the degree of their beliefs, faith, and understanding, they have seen things that some people would call the miraculous unfold in their life. They don't see that as miraculous. They see it just as God doing what God does, and that is the creativeness of all that is. How do we get to that point? Again, we stop wherever we're at. We recognize that we're just where we're at. How do we know what's going on with where we're at? All we have to do is look at what life is mirroring back to us. We've talked about this. Life mirrors back to us what we believe. So if we're struggling a little bit in life, if we see deficits in life, if we see life as a struggle that is involved suffering, that's where our beliefs lie. If we see life as something that is challenging, life is obstacles, but life is also God expressing through us, Spirit expressing through us as we move into and through this thing that we call life, that we have a bigger God, if you will, a bigger principle than anything that life can bring at us, then there's no purpose to the concept of suffering. There may be struggle, absolutely. If we don't struggle, we don't grow. But through the struggle, we can move forward in faith, confidence, and belief with an expectation of seeing demonstrations and manifestations with the intention and the expectation that that is what is. And there are people, my friends, that do this on a daily basis. You know, there was a time around the turn of the 19th to the 20th century when New Thought was much more prominent than it is today. And it's not prominent today, not because what New Thought teaches wasn't valid, but it's not so prominent because so much of what New Thought taught back in the day has been incorporated into what we call the secular world, if you will, in this day. You know, people think positive. They think about, you know, having a positive attitude, you know, how to win friends and influence people, the law of attraction, various things. And they don't necessarily think about them from a consciousness of a spiritual reality that is the underpinning, the foundation, if you will, behind these things. So when things don't work out, they say, well, that's life. But life doesn't have to be that way, because life itself is God expressing as life through each and every one of us. You know, I teach this, I share this pretty much on a weekly basis here through New Thought Talk. I have classes that I teach, and I interact with people, and I watch things unfold, and it's amazing to me, and it is. It's almost miraculous. But you know, I can know that I know that everything that I'm talking about is not beyond anybody. And you know, if it's not beyond anybody, that means for you also that it is available to you, that you can take the time. You can go online. You don't have to go to any place in particular, to a center or a church or whatever. You can go online and you can look up New Thought. There's various online resources. There's a lot of literature online of some of the early teachers, people like Ralph Waldo Trine, Ernest Holmes, his brother Fenwick, Emma Curtis Hopkins, many other people out there that are no longer with us, but they were the pioneers. And you can begin to read and study this. If it makes sense to you, if you feel within yourself a connectedness, then follow that thread. If you don't feel a connectedness, you know, that's fine. Maybe that's not where you're at right now, and that's perfect too. There is no perfect place for me to know for you to be. There's only a perfect place for you to know where you to be, and that works for each and every one of us, because our journey is individual and individualized. And so life unfolds for us at the level of our belief, and as we choose it to unfold. So, you know, we move forward. We call this show New Thought Talk. I am a minister of religious science, but, you know, in most everything I share on this show, you can find it at any of the other New Thought churches or centers out there. And there are resources where you can look up one if there's, you know, something that you'd like to, you know, maybe follow up on. Centers for Spiritual Living, abbreviated CSL, you can look them up online. The Christ Unity organization out of, I think it's out of Kansas City, Missouri, or Kansas City, Kansas. Anyway, Unity churches, they're out there. You can, Christ Universal Temple, they're out of Chicago. Divine Science, there's just, you know, like any other faith, there are various variations of that, and there's one out there that may touch you, that may, you know, open up to you in such a way that you can make that connection. And I encourage you to do that. And in so doing, like I said before, if you have a faith that you grew up with, that you feel strongly about, follow that faith. But maybe learn a little bit more about how you can actively participate in your experience of this thing called life. You know, it's amazing things. History is replete. It's full of people that have found the connectedness within themselves with the divine. And some of those people we know about. You know, we know about people like Jesus, and we know about people like Confucius and Lao Tzu. You know, and those are old, okay, a long time ago. But we also know, like, about John of God, or you know, various other healers that live in this era and this age. There's something through all of those that connects them, and that something is something we call belief. And they're not exceptions. They're just examples of something that any one of us, as we open ourselves up to a greater understanding of a greater good, can see and experience in our life. For you, today, regardless of what's going on in your life, if you feel like life may be hopeless, if you feel that maybe you're helpless, I encourage you to stop right now. Quiet your mind. Maybe take some deep breaths. Close your eyes and just allow yourself to experience the innerness that exists within you. And as we close out today, know that the light of God surrounds you. As you close your eyes, you think about that. The light of God surrounds you. How awesome is that? The love of God enfolds you. It cannot not enfold you because God is everywhere expressed, and is expressing as you, and that love's an infinite love. The light of God surrounds you. The love of God enfolds you. The power of God, the infiniteness, the power of God, it protects you. And the presence of God watches over you. No matter where you are at, God is there. Think about it. No matter where you're at, no matter how dark you may see things around you, there's a bright light that exists within you. God is there. And with God being there, my friends, all is well. All is well. And so it is. And I'll see you next week when we come back. Make it a blessed week. Own your day. Step out in spiritual self-reliance. Talk to you later.
CentralValleyTalk.com